This is the Prime Pod. I'm Robert McLean, and I'm here today with Pavel Novak from Savills. Pavel is the head of office agency for the Prague office. Pavel, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
So, Pavel, we're going to be speaking. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the Prague office market, obviously. But I thought we'd start first with a role that wasn't quite so, I think, normal for you. A year ago, I think it is, Savills moved into their new office at Mazarička. What was it like to be on the other side of an office move? It's a big change. Did it give you more empathy for the clients that you help?
Yeah, it was great to be once on the other side. You know, it was actually, I think it was maybe in 10 years since the international agency moved in Prague or something like that. You know, typically on the agency side, it's often used, it's often managed by the back office, by finance, by CFO or someone. But this time, Stu delegated the whole office project on me, and we actually didn't have any lease expiry in that aspect. But we ran in the opportunity that there was a newly vacated unit in Mazarička, which already had some basic fit out in. And although the unit was like 50% bigger than we actually needed, I decided to give it a shot. Well, you know, we negotiated it 2 years ago, so rents above 30 euros was like, oof.
Well, I remember speaking to Stuart Jordan, who was your MD, and he was saying, I didn't think I'd ever end up spending this much on rent.
Yeah, but you don't have to, you can't look at it through, you know, just the headline rent. I will talk about it later on. When we actually looked at our headcount projections, we realized that we will not be able to fit in our office in Florentinum because there was just no place to grow, and the unit started to get more dated. And then we decided to give it a shot. Well, I needed to argue on the international level, so to get like global approval for the relocations. So we had to commit actually that we will grow enough headcount to fill a space up in 2 or 3 or 4 years. And there we go. There we ended up in the space.
So what is it you found moving into such like a prime office building? How has it changed sort of the way you work, or when clients come in? What does it change about, you know, why is it worth that? Why is it worth the premium on the rent then?
You know, when I said that we had the growth projections for 2 or 3 or 4 years, so we fill the space up, which was like almost 50% bigger than we had by the time. Well, we actually made it already. So we made it in less than 12 years. So our headcount was like 60 people when we moved in, and now we are at 90. So we had more than 30 people recruited in less than a year, which is, I think, great result.
Right. Look, your office agency goes back 10 years now, I think. You've built up some institutional knowledge, I guess, over that time. How has the role of office agency changed in recent years? And what is it you've learned over those 10 years, I guess, as a team?
Well, I think the only word you need to remember is relationships. But it doesn't go just with clients and the market, but it's also internally. So as my team and some of my colleagues within my office agency, we have been together for more than 10 years. And the trust within the team, you know, it's a long-term game. It's not just like you would, you know, look at the annual budget. Does the employee meet the budget or not? We fire him or let him go. No, the agency is a very long-term game. So, and same goes with the staff. So I was able to build a relationship with the team. We have mutual trust, and it pays off in the long term.
Where do you see new business coming from? I mean, I realize it's all about relationships, but it's also about creating new ones. Do you see is there a new wave of potential tenants coming in? Are there more companies that perhaps weren't thinking about the kind of space, they weren't thinking about using office agents like yourself? Where are you finding the new business?
So basically, when I speak about relationships, it's sometimes referral. So mouth of word, which helps us a lot. Actually, we use loads of tools from AI to websites and so on. But when I look at the actual numbers and like the budget and our revenue stream, majority is still relationship driven, because you can get loads of small leads. But when 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 the occupier has actually a need, we need to be there much earlier than when the lead is and the demand is actually created. So we already have the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not pitches, it's not AI. Although we use it, it's still the relationships with the clients and the mutual trust.
I mean, we're already speaking a lot about AI. I think in general, it's one thing for agents to use it. Is there a tendency, do you think, for the tenants to think, I don't need an agent, I've got AI, and they look up things? Is there a tendency for them to think they don't need expert help anymore?
Definitely, when we negotiate with some tenants, and either we are on the side of the landlord or we are side of the on the occupier side, we can actually see when there is someone trying to be smart and using AI tools against us.
Mm-hmm.
But typically the AI gets the information somewhere, and sometimes I find that actually the tenants and people responsible on the tenant side are trying to use information which was found by AI in some of my own reports historically.
Right.
So it's sometimes funny because it's not there yet to be that powerful. It's still a good tool, but it's not a good negotiator on its own just by itself.
Mm-hmm. Now we're talking about like where new business is coming from. There's a new, it's not new anymore, but I feel like it's becoming, taking on greater and greater importance, and that's flexi space. You guys just had an event at Trezor where you hired a well-known, popular moderator even to come down and moderate an event about flexi space. What is the fascination? Why is it you're focusing on it that much?
Because that's just like a local and global trend. The market is getting there. It's still small, People talk about flexi market, about so many locations, operators, and so on. But still, it's still just a little above 3% of the whole market, and so there is so big space to grow.
Well, do you have any sort of estimate, like how much of the market it could eventually encompass? I mean, do you see it? Is it for you? Is it more important from the tenant side or from the occupier side? In other words, you could see it as, it's one thing where traditionally tenants might have gone into obviously normal space, but which do you see it more significant for you as a business? You're finding the people who will go into, who will take space in a flexi space, or the operators themselves taking space in office buildings?
Like we have position on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, I try to help both, as I said, and the market, as I said, is just 3%. If the market, the healthy level for now would be 5 to 10% of the market would be dedicated to flex and service offices.
Mm-hmm.
So just to get there, the whole flex market would need to double. And even that would mean that it would have to suck all the vacancy from the market, which is not yet possible. So when you look at the operators themselves, they are not fighting for clients. They are fighting for new space. And I think that's our better positioning in that aspect, because many of the clients are sometimes too small for us to handle.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, we are there for the long term. And this bigger strategy is like our better positioning.
How often does it act as a sort of incubator in which companies will come in and they get used to sort of premium space or really well equipped space, and then they grow into larger offices? I mean, is it bringing companies in at an earlier stage in their development than might have been the case without flexi space?
There are so many angles you can look at it at. So you can look at it as an incubator. So basically, when there is a global Nasdaq firm who enters Czech market, wants to grow from zero to hero, from 0 to 200 workstations, where do you grow? You don't lease a space for 4,000 square meters straight away. You need to start somewhere and see where it goes. You don't make a big commitments, especially in this market with so high fit-out cost. So this is a great place to start. But we see it also from the other side. That basically we have big corporates who decide to switch from standard office and move into service office, despite that they have nice, beautiful office, because just of global strategy and the flexibility it brings.
Are you finding that the developers are learning from what the flexi operators do in terms of the amenities that they bring in? I mean, for example, we're here in Zenwork. We're in a podcast studio in a flexi environment. Are there and that's something you don't see in the standard office building. What are developers or landlords learning from the flexi space?
So basically, when we had this event, which was called Savills Co-working Clash in Trezor 1 month ago, we had a few categories, but we had separate categories for landlord operators, because we see a gap between a standard operator, which is like Scott Weber, Work Lounge, IWG, and so on, and when landlords does the operation themselves. I would compare it to a hotel. It's a different business. So only some landlords actually have the capability to do it properly, but the specialization, the focus, the dedication, it's different. It's different model.
You could argue that most of the developers who try it don't succeed, or they don't end up focusing on that. I mean, I think Skanska began the business here in Prague, in Prague 7, for example. This space was opened up, I think, by HB Reavis, but eventually it seems like they get out of the deal. I think, as you're saying, because it's a specialized discipline, and
Exactly.
it's quite. I think it's manpower intensive, and there's a certain. There's a sophistication that's needed to keep the best tenants.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, deals, from what I've read in your reports, are taking quite a bit longer. What's different about a tenant in 2026 compared to 5 years ago? Why is this taking longer now?
Well, that's an interesting question. When I started in real estate and commercial agency 16 years ago, I had the impression that, the contracting and everything, we were saying that deals takes like 6 to 12 months. Now we have deals where just the contracting after heads of term signature takes like 6 to 9 months, in some cases, which is too long, And then we had a survey internally across like Savills branches and offices, and number one observation across EMEA and Savills tenant rep agents was that the deals take longer. Now, with those AI tools and all the technology and everything, you would assume that that the deals would be faster, because you can make everything faster. But actually, the opposite is true, and I was wondering why. And when I put all those topics together, then I realized actually the stakes are higher, because 10 or 15 years ago, the office was just an office. The process run by office manager MD. But now, it's not just office. It's like it represents company culture. It represents employees. HR are much more involved generally in the decision-making process. And of course, as I said, stakes are higher because the rents went up, and especially the fit-out costs went up. Architects are more involved. There is workplace or consultancy element. And so many inputs, which just make the process much more sophisticated, hence requiring also more approvals, which is also the thing why it takes longer than before. That's my personal opinion.
Does it lead to better decisions, do you think, or does it mean that is it just a way for more parts of an organization to get involved in a decision? Is it a power grab?
Well, actually, there was a time, like I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, when we observed that every decision needs to be based on data, which means employee surveys, do we have to move or not?
Participation in the process.
Asking all the employees, and then making decisions based on those surveys, and those data. But when you realize that if you have too much data, do you make better decisions if you ask everyone on the streets what do you want to do? Do they have all the information? Do they see the company vision? Typically not. And now we are seeing that, of course, it's company sensitive, that there is more, again, intuition in the decision-making process, which means actual leadership. Well, so there is a CEO who decides we are going this direction. And it doesn't mean that he lives nearby, but...
Not always, at
Not
least.
always. But, there is a company vision, which not everyone and there is some direction and strategy, and not every employee is informed accordingly.
There is the risk that it would simply be risk management rather than decision making.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So, I mean, if they're taking longer, break it down though. I mean, because renewals are now a huge part of the market, especially in Prague. Which takes longer, renewals or moves to new space?
You would assume it would be the relocation, but not always. Because, first instance, companies are typically running the process in parallel. So they are deciding, comparing both options, stay or go, which means they make the decision simultaneously in the last stage of the whole process. But even though when the company is staying or occupier is staying, we see that there is always some remodeling element included, new fit out or something, which prolongs the whole process as well. So it's not just you would sign a lease or amendment to renew the contract, but there is always some process included, and we have renegotiations which take a year or longer anyway.
What does it say about the Prague market that renewals are such a huge portion of it?
Well, if you would read a standard report, you wouldn't assume that there are so many renewals, because the numbers are inflated, because there were owner-occupiers deals like Česká spořitelna, ČEZ, and so on, which inflate the numbers of relocations. But if you actually look in bigger detail in the numbers and exclude those big deals, you would see that within top or 25 deals in 2024 and 2025, only 3 were actual new leases. Rest were relocations. What does it say? Well, either there's no product, high costs, and so on, but ultimately it will lead into deferred demand in the future, which will come back, but we don't know when.
Mm-hmm. What is it that makes relocation so hard? Is it simply the rents in new space that has to be paid, or because obviously people are generally going to pay more than they were before? Is that the main thing that makes things difficult?
Well, you would assume that it would be rents, because on new development, typically the rents are higher, like 23, 24 euros. Some companies are not used to seeing this big number because they are still paying below 20. But when we go into full analysis, it's not just about rent, but I would assume it's the fit-out costs, which sometimes have the same value as 5, 6, or 7 years rent just on a loan. And what is the number? Is it 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 euro per square meter easily? So I think this is the bigger hurdle than the actual rents itself, because you can go when you are moving, you can go to more efficient space, pay higher rent, but for less square meter, and you're equal. But the problem are the fit-out costs.
How much of that are excuse me? How much of that are landlords currently willing to cover, and how is that changing?
Fit-out landlords of course contribute to the fit-out costs, but it's also always some kind of proportion of the rent, which they are giving back as an incentive for the fit-out to the tenant. But the fit-out costs, they are growing in absolute numbers much faster than the landlord's contribution, which are not able to cover. So basically, the proportion of the landlord's contribution compared to the whole fit-out cost is going down. But when we were talking about why is it so difficult to relocate the tenant, it's not about just the fit-out cost, but there is also the risk element. Because in order to make the relocation work, you need to sign 7, 8, or 10-year lease. We haven't been signing 5-year leases for some time already, because the math doesn't work on a 5-year lease on a relocation. But on the other hand, when you sign a 10-year lease, you are building an office for the world that doesn't exist yet.
For a number of employees, that it's difficult to predict, especially at a time when the way we work and how many people are going to be working in our offices and how many can be replaced or made more efficient by AI. There's a lot of uncertainties right now.
Exactly. We are now in 2026. So if you sign a new lease from 2028 for 10 years, your expiry will be in 2038. By that time, you may, I don't know what will be there, but you may have robots in the office easily.
Things could change between now and 2038,
exactly.
I think.
But it could go also the other direction. So it takes a courage to sign actually the 10-year lease. But without that, the math doesn't work.
And when you say the math doesn't work, is that because that's the only way to make it affordable to pay for the fit-out costs, for example, or for what is it about the math that isn't working precisely?
It's the fit-out cost. So basically,
okay,
basically, if you have a fit-out cost which is equal to 5 years rent,
right?
What's the point?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, for fans of new office space, it's been tough times pretty much ever since COVID. But I think gradually it's just been getting worse, and I think this year may be the lowest on record. What is it? 26,000 square meters that's going to come online this year. I mean, I know we like to complain about planning problems, or at least developers do. But is that really the only thing that's going on here?
Again, it's a combination of factors. The planning permit is there. You would argue it's not the only issue. Funny thing is, when I joined the office agency back in Knight Frank in 2010, year after, I was reading newspaper headlines that the permitting is an issue. It was 15 years ago. Since then, every year, newspaper headlines, events about permitting issues, permitting processes.
Believe me, I get bored of writing that.
Exactly, and I'm not again this topic. But what's changing? Nothing much change. Actually, now we are seeing the issue in that aspect. And this delivery, you told me 26,000, that before COVID, before 2020, this was a 2 months or 3 months delivery.
It was by every quarter at least that much.
Yeah, at least. But now it's
well, you see that, but that tells me that it's not just a planning issue. That I mean, the planning issue I don't think has gotten so much worse that that the supply of new office space is just getting choked off.
Of course, there were other aspects. It was the cost of the the cost of the construction were not offset enough by the rental growth. So that was the other issue. So it was a combination of factors. It is a combination of factors.
Now, I believe I've seen new prime space advertised or at least spoken about in terms of rents hitting around 35 euros. That sounds crazy for if in 2019, 21 euro rents had been the norm for at least 10 years. Somehow inflation was 2%, 3%. I understand it was low, but it seemed like office rents never went up. There was simply a different environment. You had a lot more supply coming online. I think that helped to keep prices down. I'm curious, what's driving these prices up? Is it simply the lack of new space coming online?
It's the feasibility of new development. Mm-hmm. So if you are working on a new development, the math for you on 28 euro just doesn't work in the city center. You need to be higher. But also on the other side, if you would tell me that we would be negotiating with tenants 3 or 5 years ago, rent levels of around 35 euros, I would assume you're crazy. But now we are there. We are negotiating those rents already. And for some tenants, despite it's 35 euros, the numbers actually work. Because you can't look at the rent as isolated element. We are always calculating full life cycle cost of the lease, total cost of occupancy, and the rent itself is just one element. It's one input in the whole big calculation. Mm-hmm. And actually, what didn't go up since then? So people are talking about rental growth, but basically everything went up. Also the salary. So in terms of the cost proportion within budget of average corporate, the rent, it's not taking much bigger proportion.
I have to say, if I have a concern about that argument, is that I am very curious what the value or the price that will be placed on, say, knowledge work is going to be going forward. I think I've already seen a case in which one of the big six tax or auditing agencies has demanded a price cut on its own auditor because it said, we know how much you need fewer people to do this. We're doing it ourselves. And they demanded a price cut. You're right in that the price of everything has gone up. But I am concerned long term what the impact of the development of AI will be on the overall cost of products, not just software. And we're seeing a bit of a crisis, I would say, in stock markets because of stock markets, because on software, but also this knowledge-based industry, which could be set for a shakeup, and what impact that might have on rents and what companies can actually afford to pay in rents.
True, but where this will lead? When we are talking to occupiers, legal firms, and so on, they will need less junior positions, but the senior positions, they will always be there, at least for some time, which means you will maybe not need so much average space, but you will need more quality space. So office market will not be so affected so much. We actually did a survey and analysis on that. I think today we are releasing a press release based on the Savills data, and actually so far it's having the opposite effect. So actually the AI companies are sucking the space from the market, recruiting more people. But of course, in the long term, IT firms, developers, they will be affected.
You could argue, in fact, that the Prague office prices were held abnormally low for a long time. I mean, the fact that they were 20, 21 euros just for such a long time, that wasn't reflected, say, in Warsaw, where there's a lot more fluctuation, I would say, but they would go up to 30 euros and then come down for some time. So, I mean, it could be that the lack of new space coming online may have had a sort of a concentrating effect in pushing up of rents.
Definitely.
Now, one impact of the lack of new supply coming on is the aging stock. How office buildings in Prague are not getting any younger. Your company started off 10 years ago as an office agency. A lot of the office buildings at that time were youngish or newish. They're not newish anymore. And in the meantime, there's been a whole raft of new regulations, ESG notwithstanding, being among the biggest of them, that's put new requirements and new pressure to have modern space. How is that working out? What's the impact of this aging stock?
That's a great question, because everyone is talking about lack of supply, but in the meantime, time flies. So when I look at the whole stock in Prague office market, I went through the numbers. I realized that more than 50% of the stock undergone development or a major refurbishment more than before 2010. So more than 55% is pre-2010, and even I think it's 30% of the stock or more is more than 200 buildings generally is more than 20 years old. Which is, I think, bigger issue actually than the new development, because if you look at the pipeline, do you know how many buildings are planned to undergo major refurbishment?
Tell me.
12. So which is almost nothing. On the contrary, after 2020, only 12% of market was built. So only 12% of buildings are relatively new. So time flies. And I think this could cause bigger, with ESG, this could cause, in combination with lack of supply, this could cause bigger issue in the future. Of course, it will create more rental pressure upwards on the new development, but also on the existing stock. But I never look at Czech Republic as isolated element. Neither do global occupiers. They always compare us with other countries. Which brings me to your earlier question or comment that, if the rents go always on the upward trajectory, salaries as well in the Czech Republic because of low unemployment. But on the other hand, we have aging stock, low supply, and so on. Aren't we just becoming kind of like expensive middle class, somewhere stuck between East and West? And we are already seeing that some companies, global occupiers, are thinking, oh, maybe we'll just close the book in the Czech Republic and move our office and operation to Spain, because it's not working for us here anymore, or it may not work in the long term here for us.
And that's based on the type of offices they can rent here? I mean, you're saying that plays a big role then?
Not just the place, but the combination.
Okay.
Place, costs, and so on. In the Czech Republic, in Prague alone, you have 350,000 foreigners. Not everyone, of course, works in the office, but a significant proportion. In some companies, it could be more. In some IT companies, it could be more than 50% of staff are actually expats. And whether they live in Prague or they move to Spain or they move to Warsaw, it's not such a big issue for them. Like if you were born here, so it could also create some, I wouldn't say migration, but corporate relocations and outbounds.
What would you say that is changing about corporate demand for office space, and how does the Prague market need to react to that?
Well, on one hand, you are pushed into long commitments like 10 years. You have a high fit-out cost and everything, but the risk, which is now in the market, is so high, and many of the tenants are just afraid to make such long commitments. So there is this disproportion. Do I need flexibility or do I need a nice office? So we are stuck somewhere in between, maneuvering on one side, this one on the other side, and it's affecting the market a lot. This risk compared to the costs. On the other hand, which plays in the hand of serviced offices, which is also driving the demand for those guys, and it will in the future. And I think this would be number one topic currently in the market, because as for us as an agent, when we are doing availability schedules for occupiers, we have not much new to offer, because as the Prague is not evolving much, the CFOs, office managers already know the market a little bit, so it's hard to impress them with something new.
So, what do you see any signs that this is just we're at the maybe downs, the lowest part of a cycle in terms of new supply and all that? Do you see the ice breaking in some way? What are you predicting for the next 2 years or so?
So, for us as agents, this year and next year will be difficult because of lack of product and this uncertainty in the market. We see a light at the end of the tunnel for 2028 with the new deliveries, but I think this will open up kind of scissors, because there will be, I would say, very old stock on one side. I would almost call it a zombie stock, but on the other side you have a premium top quality buildings. Those will drive the demand. So the rents will easily grow even further from here, with that risk that some companies might actually leave Czech Republic because of those high costs, and it will not be feasible anymore for them to run back office or share service center in the Czech Republic. There is this risk, and I would assume there are some thoughts in that aspect already now. And on the other hand, you would have. I would say, how to say it? This, I think, the biggest issue, the biggest risk that the company just might close the book in the Czech Republic. Then there is this stock issue, which will age and create a zombie stock.
What advice would you have for a company that's looking to move in the next 12 months?
Well, first of all, I would suggest them, because whatever I spoke about, maybe start sooner than 12 months, maybe postpone it for 18 months, 24 months, where there'll just be more options. Second suggestion would be, don't look at rent as an isolated number. Always do the math and calculate all the costs and all the scenarios, including fit-out costs, reinstatement, everything, but also the efficiency, because the trend is downsizing, but not in terms you would need less space overall, but in terms of square meters per workstation, you need maybe a little bit more efficient space. So don't look at it in that aspect, but also calculate the base case scenario, which means how much it actually costs you to stay, and what is the risk if you don't make this decision now and stay, and you would make the decision in 2 years. Will the price be lower? Maybe not. Will there be many options? Not sure. So there is this evaluate properly all scenario before you make any such commitment, and this is something what we do on daily basis.
In other words, ask Savills is your advice.
Or our competitor,
Okay.
We try to be fair in that aspect.
Pavel, thank you very much for a great discussion.
Thank you.